The story begins not with conquest, but with absence. As the smoke of Troy fades into the Aegean sky, the victors scatter like ghosts, each driven by a longing far more powerful than glory home. Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, stares into the horizon, believing the hardest part is over. But war's final wound is exile, and his journey has only begun. Home, a word spoken easily, yet within it lies an entire world. Safety, memory, belonging. For Odysseus, it is more than an island. It is his wife's waiting silence, his son's unanswered questions, the feel of olive wood beneath his fingers. It is identity itself. Without Ithaca, who is he? The Odyssey is not a tale of exploration, but of return. A return not only to a place but to meaning. And for all who listen, it echoes something universal. Across every culture and era, the longing for home, be it physical or spiritual, remains timeless. It is the human condition made myth. When Homer sings of Odysseus, he does not describe a perfect hero. He offers us someone far more valuable, a mirror. Odysseus is clever but flawed, strong yet fragile. In his triumphs and mistakes, we see reflections of our own internal voyages, our own contradictions and dualities. His tale resonates because it speaks not to warriors, but to wanderers, to those who have lost direction, who have seen the world but not found themselves in it. His enemy is not just Poseidon, it is weariness, temptation, despair, forces that reside as much within as without. The journey begins not with battle, but with the ache of absence. Odysseus's ship sails from Troy expecting a swift return, yet each wave carries him further into the unknown. In this way, the sea becomes not merely a setting but a force of transformation, a vast, indifferent mirror of the soul. For 10 years, Odysseus is pulled between shores and selves. His name, once sung in celebration, fades into rumor and myth, and in Ithaca time does not wait. His son grows in shadow, his wife weaves and unweaves her days, and his home becomes a battlefield of uncertainty. Yet it is precisely this unraveling that gives the story its power. The Odyssey does not glorify the destination, it honors the endurance of the return. Every detour, every delay, shapes the man who will one day stand again at his threshold. Changed, scarred, whole. What makes the Odyssey immortal is not its monsters or gods, but its emotional truth. Behind every encounter is a question. What does it mean to be human when the world is no longer what you knew? Odysseus must rebuild not only his journey, but himself. The brilliance of Homer's narrative lies in its duality. While Odysseus sails seas, Telemachus grows up without him. While Penelope resists suitors, she grieves in silence. Ithaca becomes the story's silent protagonist, its absence felt in every line. The kingdom, like its king, waits. This longing is not confined to a mythic past. Even in our modern world, we find Odysseus in soldiers returning from war, in refugees adrift between borders, in those who leave home for survival and dream of return. His name is ancient, but his story remains painfully current. The Odyssey begins in medias res, not at the beginning, but at the heart of things. We do not meet Odysseus in glory, but in captivity on Calypso's island. He has everything a man could want: immortality, beauty, comfort, and yet he weeps. For Ithaca, for purpose. Why does he refuse eternity? Because immortality without meaning is a curse. Calypso offers a timeless paradise, but it lacks memory, family, community. Odysseus chooses mortality not for the fear of death, but for the value of what must end, what must be earned. Thus, the Odyssey teaches us that home is not given. It is reclaimed. Through trials, through suffering, through choices both wise and foolish. Odysseus's journey is not about finding Ithaca on a map. It is about becoming worthy of it once again. Even the gods cannot shield him from the cost. Poseidon's wrath, born of pride and offense, follows him like a shadow. Athena's aid comes not as rescue, but as subtle guidance. The divine realm mirrors the human one, full of politics, grudges, and uncertain favors. Odysseus is not always noble. His arrogance at the Cyclops' cave, his indulgences with Circe and Calypso, his secrecy and manipulation, all remind us that he is not a legend pretending to be a man, but a man whose legend emerged from his struggle to be better. Homer does not seek to show perfection. He reveals transformation. Odysseus returns not as the man who left, but as one who has faced monsters without and within. Every storm he endures cleanses him. Every lie he tells, every disguise he wears, reveals a deeper truth. And yet, despite all the detours, he never forgets his name. Even when disguised, even when stripped of crew, ship, and hope, he carries the memory of Ithaca like a compass. He forgets many things, but never the shape of home in his mind. So begins this epic, not as a war story, but a soul's pilgrimage. Odysseus may be a warrior, a husband, a king, but most importantly, he is a seeker of truth, of belonging, of the thread that ties a man's past to his future. And that thread leads home. Long before Odysseus ever set foot on a ship, a great world stood in splendor across the eastern Mediterranean. A world of bronze and stone, of kings and scribes, of cities that shimmered like fire beneath the sun. This was the late Bronze Age, and it breathed its last around 1200 BCE. The fall of Troy was not the beginning of a myth, but the end of an era. Across Mycenae, Ugarit, Hattusa, and beyond, mighty kingdoms collapsed like dominoes. Palaces that once pulsed with trade, tribute, and power now lie buried beneath layers of ash and time. Scripts like linear be faded into oblivion. A storm unlike any the ancient world had known had passed through, and in its wake memory would become our only map. The exact cause of this cataclysm remains uncertain. Historians debate theories of drought, famine, earthquakes, invading sea peoples, or internal revolts. Perhaps it was all of these at once, converging like a wave of fate. Whatever the reasons, the result was clear. A once globalized world unraveled into shadow. Trade routes disappeared. Literacy vanished. Cities burned. And in the ruins, stories flickered like dying embers, kept alive not by scholars or kings, but by storytellers, wandering bards, memory keepers of a civilization lost to time. In this silence, the Odyssey was born. What Homer would later write was not merely fiction. It was cultural memory, refracted through generations. When he spoke of palaces and armor, of sea routes and diplomatic hospitality, he echoed a world long extinct. His epics were not eyewitness accounts, but distant recollections, polished into poetry. To the Greeks of Homer's age, likely the 8th century BCE, this Bronze Age was as distant as the medieval world is to us. And yet, through the oral tradition, the memory survived. Kings whose names were long forgotten were reborn in rhythm and rhyme, preserved in hexameter rather than on stone tablets. This dual perspective gives the Odyssey its haunting depth. It is a poem set in a world of gods and heroes, but written in an age of farmers and colonists. It remembers palatial grandeur but speaks to a people rebuilding from ashes. It is nostalgia rendered as art. The collapse created not just loss but transformation. In the Greek Dark Age that followed, people lived in small villages rather than grand cities. The great bronze weapons gave way to iron tools. Hierarchies loosened. Literacy, when it returned, came not in the form of palace scribes, but through a revolutionary tool, the alphabet. The adoption of the Phoenician script allowed for something new, writing that could capture spoken language with precision. When Homer's lines were finally recorded, they carried within them the cadences of centuries, now frozen in ink. The transition from oral to written culture would change the world forever. But before writing, there was performance. Picture it. A firelit hall, men gathered with wine and meat, and a lone bard singing of wrath, wanderings, and homecomings. These Ewadoi oral poets were the memory of their people. Each retelling was both repetition and reinvention. Homer, or whoever bore that name, was the greatest of these. Perhaps not a man, but a tradition. Perhaps not one voice, but many woven into one. Whether blind, as later legends claimed, or simply visionary, Homer's genius lay not in invention, but resurrection. He made the past live again. Archaeological discoveries support fragments of his world. The site of Troy, unearthed by Heinrich Schliemann in the 19th century, revealed a city burned in the right time. Mycenaean palaces at Pylos and Tiryns mirror Homer's descriptions. Even Odysseus's own Ithaca, though debated, carries traces of Bronze Age nobility. Yet the Odyssey is not a history book. It does not seek facts, it offers truth. Truth about the human spirit, about the fragility of civilization, about the eternal longing for meaning amidst chaos. In blending myth with memory, it creates something more enduring than either. The gods who walk through Homer's world are not whimsical divinities. They are echoes of ancient beliefs, carried through dark times, reshaped for new ears. Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, these were more than characters. They were memory itself, divine archetypes anchoring a people to their forgotten past. Even the ships Odysseus sails carry the memory of real Mycenaean galleys, with painted prows and dual-purpose sails and oars. The feasts, the bronze swords, the honored guest rituals, all remnants of a world that once thrived and then vanished, leaving only tradition in its place. And so, every time the Odyssey is read, it becomes an act of resurrection. The Bronze Age lives again, not in stones or artifacts, but in story. People are not dead. They are merely waiting to be spoken. The poem's power lies in this liminal space, between history and legend, between ruin and remembrance. Odysseus's world may be gone, but its questions remain. What survives collapse? What endures when memory fades? The Odyssey answers not with certainty, but with song. For those who first heard it, the story was not distant. It was a mirror, a way to reclaim pride, purpose, and connection. A way to believe that even in a shattered world, the human spirit could still sail home. Thus, the Odyssey is more than a tale. It is a bridge from the known to the lost, from silence to song, from the end of an age to the beginning of remembrance. And on that bridge, Odysseus walks, carrying not just his fate, but the memory of a world. When the first lines of the Odyssey were spoken, "Sing to me, O muse of the man of many turns," they summoned more than a story. They conjured an entire world. And yet, for all the glory those lines have earned, we still know almost nothing of the person who first gave them breath. Homer, a name that has become synonymous with epic genius. But was Homer a man? A myth? A mask worn by a tradition? Ancient legend paints Homer as a blind poet from Ionia, wandering the coast of what is now Western Turkey. 7 cities competed for the honor of calling him their native son. Yet not a single confirmed detail survives. His name may mean hostage or companion. His life is hidden behind his legacy, and perhaps that is exactly as it should be. What we call Homer may not have been one person at all. The Iliad and Odyssey, with their sophisticated structure and unified themes, could be the culmination of generations of bards, poets who refined, reshaped, and recomposed oral tales passed down over centuries. Homer, then, is less an individual than a voice formed by many voices. But if we cannot see the poet, we can hear him. His style is unmistakable, grand but intimate, ceremonial yet urgent. His verses move like waves, building rhythm with each repetition, each epithet, each echo of a line. This was not accident. It was mastery born of memory, a performance honed in firelit halls, not on the written page. The oral poets of Homer's age were not simply storytellers. They were cultural memory keepers. Known as awadoi, they carried within them the deeds, values, fears, and aspirations of their people. With nothing but voice and lyre, they preserved a civilization that had no books, no libraries, only the human breath. To achieve this, they relied on a technique called formulaic composition. Rather than memorizing fixed scripts, they memorized patterns. Stock phrases like rosy-fingered dawn, swift-footed Achilles, or the wine-dark sea. These phrases fit the rhythm of the verse and could be flexibly reused, allowing the bard to improvise while maintaining structure. This method was not simplistic. It was symphonic. Imagine weaving a tapestry live, in front of an audience, with only tradition as your guide and memory as your loom. The result was fluid yet ordered, shaped yet living. No two performances were exactly the same. Each was a new birth of an old soul. The meter of Homer's verse, dactylic hexameter, was itself a kind of music. Each line, 6 feet long, pulsed with beats that echoed like heartbeats. This rhythm was both a mnemonic tool and a form of enchantment, captivating listeners and aiding the poet's recall. Poetry in this world was not read, it was lived. And for a time this was enough. But as the Greek world slowly re-emerged from its dark age, something radical happened. Around the 8th century BCE, a new technology crept into the bard's domain. The alphabet. Borrowed from the Phoenicians, it allowed spoken words to be frozen, captured in ink and clay. It is likely that Homer's epics were among the first major works to be written in this new script. Whether he himself dictated them to a scribe or his followers recorded them later, the act of transcription changed everything. Preserved what had once been perishable. It transformed performance into permanence. Yet even in their written form, the poems retain the flavor of their oral roots. Repetition, episodic structure, and familiar phrases all speak to a time when the poet was a performer and the audience a congregation. Reading the Odyssey is like hearing an echo of a voice that once echoed across generations. Whoever Homer was, his genius lay not in creating from nothing, but in shaping chaos into meaning. He gathered fragments of myth, memory, and legend and wove them into a seamless tapestry. His epics were not mere entertainment. They were cultural DNA, transmitting values across centuries. He gave us heroes who bleed, gods who scheme, and mortals who dream of home. He did not sanitize the world. He revealed its contradictions. His characters are not flawless paragons but tangled souls, torn between impulse and duty, pride and humility, mortality and the divine. And in doing so, he created the first psychological literature. Odysseus is not just brave. He is conflicted, clever, afraid, tempted, and proud. Penelope is not merely loyal. She is strategic, weary, and quietly resolute. These are not cartoons, they are human beings, rendered in mythic proportions. The poem's language, though ancient, crackles with immediacy. When Odysseus speaks, it is not just to his crew or the gods or his son, it is to us. Across 2,700 years, his voice still reaches, still aches, still demands to be understood. Through Homer, we inherit more than a story, we inherit a voice. A voice that survived fire, ruin, and the forgetting of nations. A voice that insists memory is stronger than death, and that song can outlive empires. In every line of the Odyssey, we meet not just a poet, but a civilization speaking to itself, mourning what was lost, and imagining what could still be found. This is Homer's greatest gift. Not the tale, but the telling. Not the facts, but the feeling. So while the question, who was Homer, may never be answered, perhaps it doesn't need to be. For in the echoes of his words, we find not a man, but a mirror, one that still reflects the soul of humanity, caught between the sea and the stars. Homer does not begin the Odyssey at the beginning. He begins with absence, with longing, with a hero trapped far from home. The tale opens not on the battlefield of Troy, nor on the shores of Ithaca, but in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the silence. This choice was radical. It was intentional. It reshaped storytelling forever. This literary device is called in medias res, into the middle of things. And in doing so, Homer transforms a simple adventure into a mosaic of memory and meaning. The story unfolds like a mystery, not in linear progression, but in fractured revelations. It is a tale told sideways, through flashbacks and songs, through dreams and disguises. We first meet Odysseus in his 7th year of captivity, weeping on Calypso's island. Already, the journey has passed its midpoint, yet we are asked to walk it backward and forward with him. The effect is hypnotic. We are caught in the same time sickness as the hero himself, adrift in memory, yearning for resolution. The poem is structured like a labyrinth, twisting, returning, mirroring itself. This is no accident. Homer employs a method known as ring composition, a technique in which themes or events are introduced, then echoed in reverse order later. The structure loops like concentric circles, drawing us toward a hidden center. For example, Telemachus's journey to seek news of his father mirrors Odysseus's own return. The suitor's abuse of hospitality is counterbalanced by the kindness of Nestor and Menelaus. The poem begins and ends with divine assemblies on Olympus, like bookends holding the narrative world in place. This mirroring creates a sense of balance, not just in structure, but in meaning. It allows Homer to explore dualities, civilization and chaos, loyalty and betrayal, memory and forgetting. Each event reverberates. Each choice creates ripples. The reader is not simply told a story, they are drawn into its symmetry. Homer's genius lies in how these literary devices never feel mechanical. They feel organic, inevitable. The repetition of phrases, rosy-fingered dawn, the wine-dark sea, gray-eyed Athena, serves not only poetic rhythm but emotional resonance. These epithets become emotional cues, guiding us through the psychological terrain. The narrative also shifts in voice and viewpoint. At times it is omniscient, divine, sweeping, poetic. At others it becomes deeply personal. When Odysseus recounts his journey to the Phaeacians, we hear it in his own voice. This frame narrative adds another layer, transforming the epic into a story within a story. In these moments, Odysseus becomes not just a character, but a storyteller himself. He shapes his own legend, choosing what to reveal and what to conceal. He becomes, in a way, Homer's double, a narrator within a narration, a mythmaker telling his own myth. And this too is part of the poem's brilliance. It understands that stories are not just told, they are crafted. They are filtered through trauma, pride, shame, and hope. Odysseus's tale is not objective truth. It is personal truth, performed for an audience that has the power to deliver him home. The very act of storytelling becomes a tool of survival. Odysseus wins sympathy not by sword, but by speech. He convinces kings, gods, and strangers through narrative. His words are weapons. His stories are shields. He survives by the strength of his voice. The Odyssey, then, is not only about a journey. It is a meditation on the act of telling. What is remembered? What is forgotten? Who gets to speak and who is silenced? In a world rebuilt after the collapse of empire, memory becomes the thread that ties the future to the past. The epic's 24 books cover only about 40 days of present time. Yet through storytelling, they encompass a decade of wandering, trauma, and growth. Time expands and contracts. Memory bends chronology. The poem becomes timeless by refusing to be linear. This innovative structure inspired countless generations. From Virgil's Aeneid to Joyce's Ulysses, the ripple of Homer's narrative brilliance spreads across millennia. He wasn't just telling a story, he was creating the blueprint for all epics to come. And yet, for all its innovation, the Odyssey never loses its intimacy. We feel the sand beneath Odysseus's feet, the ache in his arms as he rows, the catch in his breath as he lies about his name. The structure may be grand, but the emotion is personal. That emotional precision is Homer's truest magic. We are not merely told that Odysseus longs for home, we feel it. We do not simply hear of Penelope's grief, we carry it. The architecture of the story is invisible, like the frame of a temple. What we see is light and shadow. What we feel is longing. Homer's use of prophecy, dream, disguise, and recognition scenes further deepens the narrative texture. The plot unfolds like a dance, approaching and retreating from truth until the final unmasking. This slow reveal creates tension not just of action, but of identity. Ultimately, the Odyssey is not a linear road, it is a spiral staircase. With each turn, we return to familiar themes, but on a deeper level. Homecoming, identity, memory, loss. These ideas are not explored once but repeatedly, like tides against the shore. Through this intricate design, Homer does not merely tell a tale. He recreates the experience of being lost, of finding pieces of oneself along the way. The narrative mirrors the journey. The art becomes the truth, and in that truth, the audience discovers something eternal. Before Homer, the hero was simple. He was Achilles, swift, strong, glorious, and doomed. He strode across battlefields like a god, his wrath more terrible than armies. Strength was virtue, glory was purpose, death was the crown. But with Odysseus, a new figure stepped into the mythic light, one not defined by brute force, but by endurance, cunning, and contradiction. In the Iliad, Odysseus is present, but he is a shadow among titans. He speaks well, advises wisely, fights bravely, but the spotlight belongs to others. He is not the fiercest. He is not the most beautiful. He is not beloved by all. But once the war ends, once the banners fall and the bronze cools, it is Odysseus who matters most. Not for what he conquered, but for what he endured. Odysseus is not the strongest. He is the cleverest. His Greek name, Odysseus, may derive from words meaning to be hated or to cause suffering. Even his name carries ambiguity. He is a man defined not by absolutes but by tension, between pride and humility, wisdom and folly, longing and distraction. He is a man of many ways, many minds, many masks. Homer introduces him with a title unlike any before him, Polytropos, the man of many turns. He is not a straight line. He is a spiral. He bends, adapts, deceives, survives. His heroism is not found in grand victories, but in his ability to navigate a world of chaos with resilience, cunning, and emotional complexity. Where Achilles embodies wrath, Odysseus embodies wit. He survives monsters, tempests, witches, and gods, not by overpowering them, but by outthinking them. He defeats Polyphemus not with sword, but with wine and words. He escapes Circe through guile and negotiation. He even lies to Penelope to test her loyalty before revealing himself. Every step is a game of strategy. But this cunning is not without cost. Odysseus's cleverness breeds pride. His fatal flaw is not weakness, it is hubris. When he tricks the Cyclops and escapes, he cannot resist revealing his true name in triumph. That moment of boastful identity invites Poseidon's wrath and extends his suffering for years. His name becomes his curse. And yet, Homer allows Odysseus to grow. He is not a static figure trapped in perfection. He changes. He suffers. He learns. We see a man who begins his journey intoxicated with victory and ends it humbled by loss. This evolution is what makes him the first psychological hero in Western literature. His trials are not only external. The monsters and storms are mirrors for inner struggle. The lotus eaters tempt him to forget. Circe tempts him to stay. Calypso offers immortality. Each obstacle tests his will not to escape the world, but to return to it, to his wife, his son, his own imperfect humanity. Odysseus is not faithful in body, but he is faithful in spirit. Though he lies with Circe and Calypso, he never abandons his identity as husband and father. He is torn, tempted, flawed, and yet his love for Ithaca, for Penelope, remains the compass that guides him home. Even his lies, his deceptions, reveal layers of wisdom. He understands the power of concealment. He wears false names as armor. He listens more than he speaks. He calculates risks, crafts disguises, and manipulates narratives to survive. In a world where gods are cruel and men are treacherous, truth is often a luxury. But in time, Odysseus must shed those lies. He must return, not only in body, but in truth. His greatest act of heroism is not escaping Scylla or outwitting suitors. It is standing before Penelope, unmasked, vulnerable, and real. That moment of recognition, of reunion, is not epic in scale, but in soul. Telemachus, his son, sees a hero not in golden armor, but in beggar's rags. The people of Ithaca know nothing of his trials. To them, he must reassert his place with silence, with patience, and with deadly resolve. His homecoming is not a parade, it is a reckoning. Odysseus is the blueprint for a new kind of hero, one who adapts rather than overcomes, who returns rather than conquers. He shows us that survival itself can be heroic, that intelligence, emotional endurance, and moral struggle are as epic as any war. This redefinition would echo through time. Later heroes, Aeneas, Dante, Hamlet, even modern figures like Frodo Baggins, inherit Odysseus's complexity. They are haunted, hesitant, introspective. They are not perfect. They are real. Homer understood that glory fades, but memory endures. Odysseus does not die young in battle. He grows old. He bears scars. He tells stories. He becomes legend not through one shining moment, but through years of persistence and pain. We admire Achilles, but we remember Odysseus. We see ourselves in him, in his cleverness and his doubts, his wanderings and his longing. He is the hero not of war, but of life. And it is life, after all, that demands the greatest courage. Odysseus teaches us that the journey home is not about returning to what was, but becoming someone worthy of return. That sometimes the hardest part is not the voyage itself, but the ability to carry memory, to endure absence, and to remain true in the face of all that seeks to unmake you. In his many turns, Odysseus maps the path of the human spirit. Not the strongest, not the purest, but the one who endures, the one who returns. Far from the stormy seas, beyond the islands haunted by gods and monsters, a different battle was being waged, a quiet war of decay and desperation. Ithaca, Odysseus's homeland, had waited 20 years for its king to return. But kings are not only absent in body. When their presence is delayed too long, even memory begins to betray them. Ithaca was never the richest of Greek kingdoms. It lacked the marble grandeur of Mycenae, the powerful fleets of Sparta, the mythic fame of Troy. Yet for Odysseus it was everything, his roots, his refuge, his rightful place in the world. And for those left behind, its heart had been beating on borrowed time. In his absence, Ithaca became a vacuum. Power, like nature, abhors a void. Into that vacuum stepped 108 suitors, young nobles from across the islands. They came not only to court Penelope, Odysseus's faithful wife, but to consume, to occupy, to take. What began as ceremony twisted into siege. The suitors entrenched themselves within the palace walls, feasting on Odysseus's livestock, drinking his wine, harassing his servants. Their courtship was a farce. Their presence was parasitic. They lived not as guests, but as conquerors without swords. Each day, they slaughtered animals for lavish banquets, offerings not to the gods, but to their own gluttony. Their laughter echoed through halls once filled with counsel. They mocked tradition. They scorned restraint. And beneath it all lay an unspoken threat, the slow erosion of legacy. Without Odysseus, there was no authority. Telemachus, his son, was too young, untested, too uncertain to command respect. Penelope, though noble and wise, could not wield power in a world ruled by men. And so the kingdom teetered, not on the edge of war, but on the brink of collapse through indifference. The suitors did not just drain resources, they undermined the social contract. In ancient Greece, Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality, governed all human interaction. To mistreat a host or guest was to offend Zeus himself. And yet, these men violated that law every day, mocking its sanctity while pretending to honor its form. This moral erosion reflected a deeper rot. The elders of Ithaca, once wise advisors, now sat in silence. Perhaps they feared the suitors. Perhaps they hoped for Odysseus's return. Or perhaps, worn down by time and uncertainty, they chose convenience over courage. And so justice slept. Within the palace, the servants became divided. Some remained loyal, like the swineherd Eumaeus and the nurse Euryclea, clinging to hope. Others aligned with the suitors, either out of self-interest or fear. The household, once a symbol of harmony, fragmented into suspicion and quiet rebellion. Penelope stood at the center of this disarray, a queen without a court. Her presence held the palace together like a single thread resisting unraveling. She smiled when required, mourned in solitude, and devised silent tactics to keep the suitors at bay. Her loom became her weapon, her grief a kind of armor. The uncertainty of Odysseus's fate made everything worse. Had he died, Penelope could remarry, Telemachus could inherit, order could be restored. But with no body, no proof, the kingdom remained suspended in ambiguity. This was not absence, it was erasure without closure. The psychological toll was profound. Telemachus grew up in shadows, his identity half-formed, his confidence stifled. He was a prince, but without power, a son, but without a father. His very legitimacy was challenged daily, not by swords, but by sneers and subtle mockery. The suitors plotted not only to wed Penelope, but to eliminate Telemachus. His existence was inconvenient, a threat to their ambitions. Yet they hesitated, preferring to control him through ridicule rather than risk open bloodshed. It was a slow suffocation of youth. This domestic crisis mirrored a broader question. What happens to society when lawful rule disappears? How fragile is civilization when respect for tradition fades? Homer asks these questions not as philosophy, but through lived experience, showing a kingdom bleeding in silence. The suitors represent not merely gluttony or arrogance. They symbolize decay, the slow rot that sets in when vigilance wanes. They are not foreign invaders. They are Ithacan nobility. The threat comes from within, making it more insidious. The enemy wears a smile, drinks your wine, and waits for your will to weaken. Yet within this despair, there are embers of resistance. Eumaeus remains loyal, guarding the herds and believing in the impossible. Penelope keeps her heart hidden behind rituals. Telemachus, despite his doubts, begins to dream of action. The palace may be occupied, but its soul has not surrendered. When Odysseus finally returns, his homecoming will not be to a throne, but to a battlefield disguised as a banquet. His first war was fought with spears and shields. His final war will be fought with strategy, patience, and ruthless precision. To reclaim his kingdom, he must first cleanse it. The kingdom in crisis is not only a backdrop. It is a character in its own right, a wounded place that mirrors the inner wounds of its absent king. As Odysseus wandered, Ithaca withered. And yet, like him, it endured. It waited. For all the epic's monsters, witches, and gods, this is perhaps its darkest chapter. The quiet invasion of home. A slow, polite apocalypse. And yet, it is also the most familiar. For who among us has not seen a place fall apart in the absence of care? Who has not waited for something or someone to return? And so Ithaca stands, trembling beneath the surface. A kingdom forgotten by the world, remembered only in whispers, waiting not for rescue but for reckoning. In the world of the Odyssey, the line between mortal and divine is not a chasm, it is a thread. The gods are not distant stars. They walk beside men, eat from their tables, disguise themselves as strangers, and interfere with unnerving intimacy. Homer's universe is divine and human at once, where the will of Olympus casts shadows across every mortal choice. The gods in Homer's world are not infallible creators. They are beings of pride, jealousy, favor, and vengeance. They are reflections of the human soul writ large, with powers that can shape oceans or delay destiny. Olympus is not a heaven. It is a court, full of rivalries, debates, and grudges that spill into the lives of men. Zeus sits at the throne of this divine order, a reluctant father figure who observes more than he acts. He governs not with justice, but with balance, allowing fate to unfold even as he maintains the illusion of control. He sympathizes with Odysseus, yet does not stop Poseidon's wrath. He values order, but permits chaos. Athena, goddess of wisdom and war, emerges as the true patron of Odysseus. She is not a mere helper, but a mirror of his soul. Cunning, strategic, adaptable. She sees in Odysseus a mortal worthy of divine alliance. Her interventions are subtle. A whispered idea, a disguised encounter, a timely wind. She never hands him victory. She shows him where the path lies. Hers is the aid of insight, not intervention. She does not shield him from trials, but gives him tools to endure them. Like a mentor watching from the shadows, she fosters not reliance, but growth. Poseidon, in contrast, is wrath embodied. As god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, he represents nature's unpredictable fury. When Odysseus blinds his son Polyphemus, the Cyclops, Poseidon's rage becomes relentless. He does not aim to kill Odysseus, but to break him, to delay him, to drown his spirit in salt and sorrow. These two gods, Athena and Poseidon, do not simply aid or oppose. They symbolize the dual forces within Odysseus himself. Athena reflects his reason, Poseidon his hubris. Between them, Odysseus navigates not only the seas but the dangerous tides of his own nature. Other gods appear as well, Hermes the messenger, sent to command Calypso to release her mortal lover. Circe, the sorceress daughter of Helios, wields power indistinguishable from divine. Even Ino, the sea goddess, offers aid when Poseidon strikes. In every case, divinity intrudes into the mortal world not with glory, but with consequence. The gods are not omniscient. They make mistakes. They argue. They take sides. They fall in love. Their immortality does not make them wise. It makes them persistent. Their attention is dangerous. Their absence sometimes a blessing. To be favored by a god is to enter a game one cannot win. And yet, within this pantheon, there exists a sense of order not moral but cosmic. The universe has rules even if the gods bend them. Hospitality must be honored. Oaths must be kept. Sacrifices must be made. Those who transgress, like the suitors or Polyphemus, invite divine punishment. This moral framework is subtle but real. Homer does not preach, but he implies. The gods favor cleverness, loyalty, perseverance. They punish arrogance, greed, and impiety. Their justice may be slow, but it is inevitable, often arriving not as thunderbolts, but as consequences. The most sacred law in this world is xenia, the bond between host and guest. It is a divine contract. Zeus himself is known as Zeus Xenios, protector of strangers. To mistreat a guest is to offend the cosmic balance. The suitor's abuse of this law is not just a social crime, it is sacrilege. But even within divine justice, ambiguity thrives. Moira, fate, exists alongside the will of the gods. Sometimes, even Zeus confesses helplessness before destiny. A man may suffer not by divine will, but by his own choices. The gods guide, but mortals must walk the path and bear the burden. This tension between divine influence and human responsibility gives the Odyssey its moral complexity. Odysseus is not a puppet. He chooses. He fails. He endures. The gods may tilt the world, but he must row across it, storm after storm, mistake after mistake. In this, Homer presents a deeply human theology. The gods are part of the world, not above it. They do not solve human problems, they reflect them. Their presence deepens the stakes, expands the mystery. They remind us that behind every coincidence may lie a whisper from Olympus. Even the gods themselves are changed by their contact with mortals. Calypso, though divine, weeps when Odysseus leaves. Circe, though powerful, softens in love. Athena, though eternal, becomes invested in the success of one man. The divine is not static, it is stirred by human fire. In this divine human drama, the Odyssey suggests a truth still resonant today, that the sacred and the profane are not separate realms, but interwoven threads. Every choice, every encounter, every storm carries both the visible and the unseen. The gods of Homer may not rule our world today, but their legacy endures. In moments of coincidence, in dreams that guide, in the quiet voice of conscience, we still hear echoes of Athena's counsel or Poseidon's fury. We still feel the weight of stories shaped by hands greater than our own. So when Odysseus lifts his eyes to the sky, or when Penelope prays before sleep, they are not alone. The gods are listening, waiting, judging, and sometimes answering. While Odysseus was lost at sea, another journey was unfolding in the quiet halls of Ithaca, a journey of absence, of doubt, and of becoming. Telemachus, son of a hero he barely remembered, lived not under the shadow of greatness, but in the void it left behind. He had grown up with a name heavier than a sword and with no hand to teach him how to wield it. His life had been defined not by presence, but by longing. The suitors mocked him, the elders ignored him, even the servants, once loyal, treated him with condescension or pity. He was a prince in title alone, untried, unheard, unseen. In a world that respected only power, he was expected to wait and watch while others devoured his legacy. For most of his 20 years, Telemachus clung to the fantasy that his father would return. He dreamed of a grand homecoming, Odysseus striding through the palace doors, striking down the suitors, restoring honor to the household. But dreams are brittle and time erodes them. Doubt began to cloud his vision. What if Odysseus was dead? What if he had never been the man the songs claimed? And then, at the moment when his despair deepened into resignation, Athena came, not in the blaze of divine revelation, but disguised as Mentes, an old family friend. She did not hand him power. She handed him a question. Will you stay a boy, or will you act? Her words struck like thunder. "You must not cling to your childhood any longer," she told him. "You are no longer a child." This divine nudge shook him from passivity. For the first time in his life, Telemachus stood before the elders of Ithaca and spoke. It was a trembling speech, awkward, impassioned, raw. He accused the suitors of dishonor, begged the old men for justice, and declared his intent to seek news of his father. It was not a command, but it was a beginning. Though the suitors mocked him, and the council offered no help, something had shifted. Telemachus had stepped out of the silence. He had raised his voice. That alone was a rebellion. With Athena's continued guidance, now disguised as mentor, he gathered a crew, ready to ship, and sailed under the cover of night. The suitors feasted, oblivious. The prince was no longer waiting. His first destination was Pylos, the kingdom of Nestor, one of the last surviving heroes of Troy. There, he witnessed something he had never known: respect. Nestor received him as a guest, honored him with feasts and gifts before even asking his name. For a boy raised in a house of derision, this was revelatory. Though Nestor had no direct news of Odysseus, he spoke of the man Telemachus yearned to know. He told tales of his intelligence during the war, his counsel, his daring. For the first time, Telemachus heard stories of his father not as myth, but as memory. He began to understand that Odysseus was more than a name. He was a man, shaped by hard choices and dangerous roads. From Pylos, Telemachus traveled to Sparta, accompanied by Nestor's son, Pisistratus. There he met Menelaus and Helen, the very couple whose union had sparked the war. Their palace gleamed with wealth and echoes. And yet, even here, the war had left its mark. Helen spoke of loss, regret, and longing. Menelaus recounted his own wanderings and the cost of victory. At this court, Telemachus learned another lesson: that kingship was not glory alone, but responsibility, pain, and the burden of memory. When Helen recognized his resemblance to Odysseus, it was not a compliment, it was a torch being passed. He could no longer hide in childhood. He had been seen. Menelaus shared the first solid news. From the sea god Proteus, he had learned that Odysseus still lived, held captive by the nymph Calypso. Telemachus's reaction was not joy, but resolve. His father was alive, and so was hope. But more importantly, he himself had changed. Through his journey, Telemachus absorbed the codes of kings and warriors. He watched diplomacy in action. He learned when to speak, when to hold his tongue. He practiced discretion, observed loyalty, and planned carefully. His silence at Nestor's court, his tact in Helen's presence, his strategy to avoid ambush on his return, all marked his transformation. Meanwhile, back in Ithaca, the suitors discovered his absence. Their reaction revealed his new power. No longer was he an annoyance, they plotted to kill him. A boy had left Ithaca. A threat would return. Their fear was proof. Telemachus mattered now. His return was not triumphant. It was dangerous, but it was also the beginning of a new order. Odysseus's homecoming would be his own. Telemachus had begun to walk not in his father's footsteps, but alongside them. The man who had wandered 10 years would soon meet the son who had grown in his shadow. The parallel between Odysseus and Telemachus is no accident. Their journeys mirror one another. One faces monsters of the sea, the other monsters of the court. One survives storms, the other schemes. Both seek to reclaim what has been lost, not just a home, but an identity. Telemachus's growth is more than subplot. It is the emotional core of the Odyssey. He embodies the hope that legacy can be earned, not merely inherited. That leadership is not granted by blood, but proven in action. By the time father and son meet again, there will be no need for explanation. The boy has become a man, not because he found his father, but because he found himself. And in doing so, he ensures that when Odysseus does return, Ithaca will not merely have its king, but its future. When poets speak of heroes, they often forget those who stay behind, the ones who hold the hearth, guard the silence, and keep memory alive through absence. Penelope, Queen of Ithaca, is one such figure. To the world, she was the woman who waited. But Homer reveals her to be far more than a wife-in-waiting. She is the quiet soul of the Odyssey, holding a kingdom and herself together by threads. For 20 years, Penelope lived in a liminal space. Not widowed, not wed, not free. Her life was neither mourning nor celebration. It was vigilance. Every day brought new uncertainty. Every season eroded hope. And yet, she endured with dignity, not because she was weak, but because she was impossibly strong. Her palace, once a seat of order and nobility, had become a theater of intrusion. The suitors filled its halls with feasting, laughter, and threats. They demanded her hand, consumed her stores, and plotted her son's death. She faced them not with swords or screams, but with silence, a silence that spoke volumes. Her greatest act of resistance was a loom. She promised to choose a husband when she finished weaving a funeral shroud for her father-in-law. By day she wove, by night she unraveled it. For 3 years this simple act delayed the inevitable. It was a deception, yes, but also a symbol of agency. A woman's mind at work, disguised in ritual. This strategy was not merely clever, it was poetic. The loom became her battlefield, each thread a refusal, each knot a promise to herself. Where Odysseus survived with guile, Penelope resisted with grace. Both were tacticians, both played for time, and both were alone in their own kind of exile. The suitors, blind to subtlety, saw her as weak. They interpreted her grief as frailty. But in truth, she was watching them, studying them. She knew their names, their vices, their threats. Her silence was not submission, it was surveillance. Even her interactions with her maids revealed her intelligence. She trusted few, tested many, and understood that loyalty could be a performance. In a palace filled with spies, every word mattered. Penelope became a master of coded speech, using tears as tools and sorrow as a mask. And yet her grief was real. Each day without word from Odysseus was a new wound. She slept little, dreamt often, and lived in the company of ghosts. Her husband's absence was not just physical. It was a hollow space in every room, in every meal, in every breath. When strangers came bearing tales of Odysseus, her heart stirred, but her mind remained guarded. She had learned the cruelty of false hope. She listened, questioned, and concealed her reactions. Trust, for her, was a currency too expensive to spend carelessly. The return of Telemachus gave her new resolve and new fear. Her son was growing into manhood, and with it came danger. The suitors began to plot his death. Her household, once a refuge, became a trap. She clung to the thought that if she could keep him alive, then the line of Ithaca might endure, even if Odysseus never returned. And then, one day, a beggar entered the palace. She did not know it yet, but the stranger was her husband in disguise. Their reunion would not be immediate. Homer, in his wisdom, allows her to test, question, and slowly unravel truth as she once unraveled her weaving. Penelope's caution in that moment is not hesitation. It is wisdom. Too much has been lost for trust to return easily. Too much has been risked to believe blindly. She plays the final game of recognition not as a wife longing for love, but as a queen defending her throne. She tests the beggar by asking about their bed, the one Odysseus carved from the trunk of a living olive tree, rooted into the floor of their chamber. No one else could know its secret, and when the beggar reacts with passionate detail, she finally breaks. The mask drops, the years collapse, her Odysseus has returned. That moment when Penelope and Odysseus weep together, is one of the most intimate in all of ancient literature. Two people, aged by sorrow and time, no longer youthful but real, no longer perfect but united. Their reunion is not the end of a fairy tale. It is the resurrection of truth. In Penelope, Homer gives us a portrait of endurance that rivals Odysseus's own. He may have crossed oceans, but she crossed time. He faced monsters, but she faced oblivion. He fought with wit, but she fought with silence. And both returned to one another, not unchanged, but unbroken. She proves that strength wears many forms, that waiting, too, can be an act of rebellion, that loyalty is not passive. It is active, painful, and deeply human. Penelope's faith was not naive. It was fierce. The world often forgets women like Penelope, those who keep the world from falling apart while others seek to save it. But Homer does not. In her, he places a quiet kind of heroism. Not the kind sung by bards, but the kind passed from mother to son, from memory to myth. And so, as Odysseus returns to reclaim his house with arrows and stratagem, it is Penelope who truly restores Ithaca. Her endurance, her intellect, and her love form the foundation on which the future will be rebuilt. Not all heroes ride the storm. Some endure it one thread, one breath, one day at a time. Not all journeys are through storms and straits. Some, like Odysseus's descent into the underworld, lead through the soul's darkest corridors. After surviving Circe's island and escaping death at every turn, Odysseus was told something no living man wants to hear. To return home, he must first travel to the land of the dead. The command came from Circe, the enchantress-turned-guide. It was not a punishment, but a necessity. Only by consulting the prophet Tiresias, who now resided in the shadows beyond life, could Odysseus learn the way home. With a heavy heart and a crew shaken by fear, he set sail toward the edge of the world, toward the gates of Hades. This voyage marks the epic's most metaphysical moment. Until now, Odysseus has faced physical dangers, storms, beasts, witches, but now he must face truth itself, as spoken by the dead. His journey becomes not only geographical, but psychological and existential. Upon reaching the shores of the underworld, Odysseus performs the ancient rites, digging a trench, pouring libations of milk, honey, and blood. From this dark sacrament, spirits begin to rise, shadowy remnants of once living souls, drawn by the offering. The first to appear is Elpenor, a fallen comrade who died unceremoniously by falling from Circe's roof. His plea is simple: bury me. Even in the afterlife, the Greek code of honor, burial, remembrance, respect still governs. Odysseus promises to return and perform the rites, honoring both duty and friendship. Then comes Tiresias, the blind seer who alone among the dead retains full awareness. He delivers a prophecy that is both warning and roadmap. Odysseus will return home, but only if he resists temptation. If his men touch the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios, all will perish. His homecoming will be long, bitter, and incomplete. This revelation is not just a plot point, it is a reckoning. Tiresias speaks less like a prophet and more like fate itself. His words are weight, not wisdom. They offer no comfort, only consequence. Odysseus listens, knowing he must still choose the path himself. As the procession of spirits continues, Homer delivers a gallery of ancient grief. Odysseus meets his mother, Anticlea, and learns she died of longing. Her presence reminds us of the cost of absence, not only for those who wander, but for those left behind. Her shade cannot embrace him. The ache is palpable. He sees Achilles, once the most glorious of men, now reduced to a silent shadow. Achilles admits that he would rather be a servant alive than a king among the dead. His words deconstruct the heroic myth. Death, even for heroes, is no reward. Glory fades. What matters is life. Odysseus also speaks with Agamemnon, who warns him of betrayal. Killed by his own wife upon returning home, Agamemnon's fate echoes like a dark mirror. The lesson is clear. Even home is not always safe. Even love can turn. Trust must be earned anew. Other figures emerge. Great kings, fallen warriors, tragic women. Each one speaks not of war or conquest, but of loss, regret, and memory. The underworld becomes a place not of punishment, but of reflection. The dead are not judged, they are remembered. And in that remembrance lies the truth of this chapter. Odysseus is not simply seeking directions, he is seeking understanding. Every ghost is a fragment of his world, a shadow of his past or a warning of his future. To hear them is to confront mortality itself. When Odysseus finally flees the land of the dead, he does so shaken and silent. No monster, no god, no tempest had unsettled him like this. In Hades, he saw what could not be fought, what awaited all men, regardless of fame. And in that silence, he found a deeper wisdom. The underworld, then, is not a detour, it is the soul of the Odyssey. It turns the epic inward, asking, what do we leave behind? What do we become when all songs end? Odysseus sailed into the dark, not to escape death, but to learn how to live. And now, with the voices of the dead still echoing in his mind, he sails back toward the light. As Odysseus sails away from Hades, he enters a phase of the journey defined not by violence, but by seduction. These are trials of the soul, not the sword. His next adversaries do not strike. They call, they beckon, they offer beauty and oblivion. The first of these are the Sirens, creatures whose voices weave desire and death. Their island is littered with bones of men who sailed too close, enchanted by their song. Odysseus, warned by Circe, prepares himself. He plugs his men's ears with beeswax, but has himself bound to the mast. He must hear their song, but cannot act. This moment is symbolic. Odysseus desires knowledge, even dangerous knowledge. He is not merely avoiding death, he is confronting it with eyes open. As the Sirens sing of glory and forgotten truths, Odysseus strains against the ropes, weeping, pleading to be released. His men row on, deaf to the song, loyal to his command. When they pass, Odysseus is breathless, not from battle but from yearning. The Sirens represent not lust, but the temptation to forget everything, to surrender to beauty and let the world slip away. He resists not with strength, but through forethought, binding himself to duty. Next comes the narrow strait between Scylla and Charybdis, two monsters that guard a sea passage so narrow, no ship escapes unscathed. On one side, Scylla, a six-headed beast who snatches men from decks. On the other, Charybdis, a whirlpool that devours whole ships. The only choice is loss. Circe's advice was cruel but practical. Better to lose a few men to Scylla than all to the maw of Charybdis. Odysseus chooses, and watches in agony as 6 of his finest are seized and devoured. He cannot fight. He cannot save them. He can only endure. This moment is harrowing. It reveals the limitations of heroism. There is no glory here, no clever trick. Only grief, necessity, and leadership. Odysseus sacrifices part of himself to save the whole, and in doing so becomes a darker, wiser man. As they sail onward, the trials shift once again, this time to temptation cloaked in sunlight. They land on Thrinacia, island of the sun god Helios. Here graze the sacred cattle that Tiresias warned against. Odysseus forbids his men to touch them, but hunger is louder than fear. While Odysseus sleeps, exhausted, his crew, led by the defiant Eurylochus, slaughters the cattle. They justify it as a necessity, making hollow offerings and singing false hymns. But the gods see all. Helios demands vengeance. Zeus answers with a storm. Lightning shatters the ship. All men are lost. Only Odysseus survives, clinging to wreckage. His leadership has failed. His warnings went unheeded. Now he sails alone, bereft of crew, broken by betrayal and divine wrath. And yet, even in this lowest moment, the Odyssey does not abandon him. He floats toward Ogygia, Calypso's island, where temptation takes yet another form. Not death, but paradise. A nymph offers him love, luxury, and immortality. No struggle, no war, just forgetfulness. Odysseus stays for years, not bound by chains but by comfort. His heroism fades into longing. Yet each day he walks the shore, staring toward the sea. Calypso offers eternity, but he wants home. In the end, it is not desire that defines him but memory. Temptation in all its forms, beauty, ease, safety, knowledge, is not simply to be avoided. It is to be faced, measured, and overcome. These trials leave no scars, but their wounds run deeper. When the gods finally intervene to release Odysseus from Calypso's island, it is not with fire or force, but through Hermes, the messenger. Even the gods seem to understand. The time has come. The sea must open once more, and the man who has wandered must begin his return. Calypso's parting is poignant. She does not bind Odysseus. She offers him a choice. Stay, live forever, love a goddess, or leave, face death, and seek a mortal woman who grows old. Odysseus chooses the path of sorrow and meaning. He chooses Penelope. He chooses Ithaca. The raft he builds is crude. His hands are worn. The sea welcomes him not with calm, but with Poseidon's final fury. A storm strikes. His raft shatters. He is dragged beneath the waves, flung against rocks. Only the help of the sea goddess Ino, who lends him a veil of protection, saves him from drowning. He washes ashore on the land of the Phaeacians, an advanced and gracious people who live in harmony with the sea. Here, Odysseus is again a stranger, again a beggar. But his story changes everything. He speaks before King Alcinous and Queen Arete. He tells of Troy, of monsters, of gods, of grief. And in doing so, he reclaims himself. For the first time, his journey becomes a narrative. Pain becomes poetry. Suffering becomes song. The Phaeacians honor him not just for his past, but for his words. They see in him not only a warrior, but a witness. They offer him gifts, a ship, and safe passage. In a world full of treachery, they are a final act of divine mercy. As he sleeps on their ship, Ithaca finally appears on the horizon. 20 years have passed. He does not land as a king, but as a stranger. Alone, disguised, and unknown. The final trial begins not to survive, but to reclaim. Odysseus wakes to find Ithaca familiar and foreign. He kisses the soil, but hides his identity. Athena appears not with trumpets, but with a plan. She transforms him into an old beggar. His return will be secret, his revenge strategic. Thus begins the most delicate phase of his journey, the homecoming of masks. Odysseus must navigate his own palace unknown to all. He must learn what has changed, who has remained loyal, who has betrayed him. The return has begun, but not with celebration. It begins with silence, strategy, and shadows. For a king who conquered Troy, the hardest battle awaits, not abroad, but at home. Odysseus had traveled across oceans, defied gods, and faced monsters. But now, on the soil of his own kingdom, he was no longer a warrior, no longer a king. He was a beggar, bent with age, wrapped in rags, a stranger in his own home. And it was by design. Athena, ever the strategist, knew that vengeance could not come with fanfare. The suitors had grown fat, arrogant, and blind. If Odysseus stormed the palace openly, he would be outnumbered and slain. But if he watched from the shadows, he could strike from within. Disguised, Odysseus made his way to the humble home of Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd. It was here, not in the palace, that true nobility still lived. Eumaeus welcomed the beggar with respect, offered food, warmth, and stories, never knowing the man before him was his lost king. Their conversations were layered with unspoken recognition. Odysseus, hiding behind false identity, heard himself praised and mourned in equal measure. Eumaeus lamented the absence of his master, cursed the suitors, and clung to hope. Odysseus saw in him a mirror of the kingdom's buried loyalty. Soon after, Athena guided Telemachus back to Ithaca. Now grown in spirit and stature, the prince returned from his own journey ready to reclaim his place. He too first came to Eumaeus' hut, where the disguised Odysseus watched his son for the first time in 2 decades. The moment was charged with heartbreak. Odysseus, once a myth to his son, now sat before him in disguise. And yet it was not the time to reveal. Only when Eumaeus departed to the palace did Athena lift the veil. She transformed Odysseus back to his true form, weathered, scarred, but unmasked. The reunion between father and son was not marked by grand speeches. It was quiet, trembling, tearful. Telemachus, long starved of fatherhood, embraced the man he had only imagined. Odysseus, long burdened by absence, finally saw the man his son had become. They wept, not just for each other, but for time lost, for memories never made, for a household stolen by arrogance. But tears quickly turned to plans. The palace had to be reclaimed not through force, but through cunning. The beggar disguise would remain. The trap would be set. Odysseus entered his palace as a shadow. None recognized him. The suitors sneered. The maids mocked. Only his dog Argos, ancient, flea-bitten, lying near death, recognized his scent. Argos, who had waited all these years, lifted his head, wagged his tail once, and died. That moment, wordless, pure, struck deeper than any blade. Inside the palace, the scene was grotesque. The suitors gorged themselves, feasting not only on food but on the dignity of the house. Odysseus, silent and watching, observed every insult, every excess. But he responded with humility, begging for scraps, enduring humiliation. Among the many suitors, Antinous stood out in cruelty. When Odysseus asked for bread, Antinous struck him with a stool. No one defended the beggar. Yet Odysseus did not flinch. Revenge must be delayed. Every insult was a tally for justice. Still, not all in the palace had turned. Euryclea, the old nurse, welcomed the beggar with kindness. And when she bathed his feet, she saw a scar, one she had known since he was a child. She gasped, but Odysseus silenced her. The moment was not yet ripe. Silence, again, was his weapon. Penelope, too, began to sense something. She questioned the beggar, probing gently. He spoke of Odysseus with such detail, such reverence, that her heart stirred. She did not yet believe, but she began to hope. Odysseus watched her closely. Her strength, her poise, her patience. These were not diminished by time. In her, he saw the soul of Ithaca still alive. She was not only a woman waiting. She was a queen still reigning, even in ruin. The beggar's presence grew unsettling. Some of the maids whispered, others mocked, but Penelope invited him to speak privately. There, he praised Odysseus's journey, weaved stories that blended truth with lies, and promised her that her husband still lived. She wept, not because she believed, but because she wanted to. Hope, for her had become a wound reopened. And Odysseus, seeing her tears, hardened his resolve. The moment of reckoning approached. That night, Penelope revealed her plan. She would host an archery contest. Whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot through 12 axe heads would win her hand. It was not a surrender but a test, for she knew that no man but Odysseus could bend that bow. Odysseus nodded in silence. His disguise was almost complete. His enemies had mocked him, abused him, dismissed him. But soon the beggar would rise, not as a guest, but as a storm. Justice was coming. But for now he waited, in rags, in patience, with eyes that had seen gods and ghosts, and now watched mortals prepare for their own end. In the great hall of Ithaca, the air thickened with tension. Penelope's challenge had been issued. Whoever could string the great bow of Odysseus and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads would win her hand in marriage. The suitors, drunk on power and wine, laughed and jostled, unaware that they had walked into a grave they'd helped dig. The bow itself was no ordinary weapon. It was a relic of strength and legacy, crafted with care, wielded only by the king himself. No man had strung it but Odysseus, and that, Penelope knew, was the point. Her trial was not a surrender to the suitors, it was a coded invitation. If her husband lived, if the gods still watched, this would summon him. One by one, the suitors stepped forward. Eager, mocking, straining. They grunted, sweated, cursed, and failed. Antinous, Eurymachus, Leota, all of them strong in body, but weak in patience, prideful in ignorance. None could string the bow, and as they failed, laughter gave way to nervous glances. Telemachus, too, stepped forward, testing himself. 3 times he nearly succeeded. On the 4th attempt, a subtle glance from Odysseus, still disguised as a beggar, stayed his hand. The boy was ready, but this was not his moment. It was his father's. Outside, the world stilled. Thunder rumbled though no clouds were seen. Athena watched from above. Fate held its breath. And then the beggar stood. At first, his request drew derision. The suitors scoffed. The beggar? They sneered. He cannot even walk upright. How will he string a warrior's bow? But Penelope, dignified and weary, silenced them. Let the stranger try, she said. Who are we to deny a man his moment? And so the hall quieted. Odysseus approached the bow. His fingers ran across the wood as one might touch a long-lost friend. He did not rush. He tested the string, rolled it between his calloused hands. His eyes were steady, his breath slow. The room seemed to dim around him. Then, with a motion so fluid it seemed like memory returning to flesh, he bent the bow and strung it in one breathless movement. No grunt, no strain, only silence and awe. Even the suitors paused, confused by the sight. The beggar had become something else. Before they could grasp what, he notched an arrow. He turned toward the line of 12 axe heads. Without a word he drew, aimed, and released. The arrow sang through the air, whispering across time and justice. One by one it passed through the eye of each axe, a perfect line, a perfect shot. The hall was frozen. Telemachus exhaled. Penelope trembled. The suitors began to understand. Odysseus turned. His disguise melted from his face. Not through magic, but through posture, presence, fury. The king had returned. The stranger was no longer a beggar, but a storm long promised. He did not shout. He did not gloat. He said only, "The time has come to pay." And then he loosed the second arrow, straight through the throat of Antinous, the most brazen of the suitors. A goblet of wine spilled. A scream rang out. Chaos erupted. But there was no escape. Telemachus, Eumaeus, and loyal Philœtius had sealed the doors. The palace had become a trap. The suitors, once predators, were now prey. They scrambled for swords, overturned tables, tried to plead. But mercy had long ago been exhausted. One by one they fell. Odysseus moved not like a man but like memory incarnate. Every arrow was a sentence, every strike a name. Eurymachus tried to bargain. Odysseus listened and then answered with death. Some tried to flee, others to hide. But the king knew his house. He knew every stone, every shadow. Justice, when delayed, becomes relentless. And in that moment, Odysseus was not just avenger, he was Ithaca itself. At last, silence returned. Blood soaked the hall where laughter once echoed. Odysseus stood among the dead, panting, spent. The bow rested beside him, its string slack, its purpose fulfilled. What remained now was reckoning, not with enemies, but with truth. Not every wrong could be avenged with arrows. Some wounds would never fully close. But the throne had been reclaimed. Order had returned. Not by force, but by patience, planning, and earned fury. Penelope, upon hearing of the massacre, did not run to embrace him. She waited, watched, tested. The bow had spoken, but so must the heart. The palace was silent now. The blood had dried on the marble floors. The suitors lay in still heaps, their laughter silenced by justice. The bow, once unstrung, rested in its place like a relic of fate, and in the heart of it all stood Odysseus, victor, king, survivor. Yet one final victory remained, the most fragile, the most human, to reclaim the love of the woman who had waited. Penelope had heard the chaos, the screams, the clash of steel. Word had reached her. The suitors were dead, slain by a stranger who claimed to be Odysseus. But her heart did not leap. Her eyes did not weep. She had lived too long in the shadow of absence to believe so easily. Dreams could lie. Faces could deceive. Only truth could pass her final test. She descended into the hall like a priestess walking into ritual. She moved not as a wife desperate for reunion, but as a queen who had learned to question the very shape of hope. When she saw the man who stood among the corpses, something within her stirred, but she did not run to him. Instead, she studied him with ancient eyes. Odysseus, battle-worn and blood-spattered, longed to hold her. After all he had endured, Cyclopes, storms, seduction, and death itself. This Penelope's cool gaze was the moment he feared most, for her judgment meant more than the gods. She approached slowly, cautiously. "You say you are Odysseus," she said, "but many have claimed that name. Many have spoken sweet lies to win a kingdom. Tell me, then, if you are truly he, what is known only to us?" Telemachus, still reeling from battle, protested. "Mother, it is him. Do you not see?" But Odysseus raised a hand to silence the boy. This test was not born of doubt. It was born of devotion. Penelope had guarded her heart as fiercely as he had guarded his life. She ordered her servants to move his bed from their chamber and prepare it for the guest. Odysseus's eyes narrowed. His bed, his secret, was immovable. It had been built by his own hands, carved from the living root of an olive tree that grew through the floor of their bedroom. The bed could not be moved unless the tree was cut down, unless the truth was betrayed. Fury and grief welled in his voice as he cried out, "No man could move that bed. I built it myself. Its roots are part of your chamber. Has it been destroyed? Have you taken another's hand?" The words struck Penelope like a thunderclap. No one could have known that truth, not even a god in disguise. Only her husband. Only the man who had built it from the earth itself, as if to anchor their love into the very bones of Ithaca. And then the mask of doubt crumbled. She wept, not with the fragility of relief, but with the strength of release. 20 years of silence, pain, fear, and hope fell from her like a cloak. She ran to him, wrapped her arms around him, and they stood together like pillars reforged, not as mythic figures, but as man and woman, broken and healed, aged but enduring. Their embrace was not youthful or fevered, it was timeless. It was the reunion of souls that had waited on opposite ends of the same journey. They spoke no words at first, for there were no words that could fill the hollow of 20 years. Only closeness could. When they did speak, it was soft and sparse. They spoke of Troy, of suitors, of dreams, of the boy who had become a man, and the man who had returned from legend. Penelope listened not just with ears, but with memory. Odysseus spoke not just with voice, but with scars. They returned to their chamber, where the olive bed remained untouched. As they lay upon it, they did not rush. They told stories until sleep finally claimed them. Stories of monsters, of gods, of survival. In that sharing, they rebuilt the marriage that war and time had tried to erode. Outside, dawn broke over Ithaca. The island breathed again. The winds were calm. The sea, once Odysseus's tormentor, now shimmered like a mirror of peace. The people began to wake to a world changed, silent halls, empty tables, and the return of their rightful king. But within the palace, it was not kingship that mattered, it was reunion. Not the throne, but the bed. Not the palace, but the chamber. And in that room, beneath the olive tree's living roots, two hearts began again. Penelope had waited not because she was weak, but because she was stronger than time. Her doubt was not distrust, it was wisdom. Her test was not cruel, it was sacred. And by passing it, Odysseus proved not just his identity but his worthiness. Their story, though etched in epic and sung by poets, ended not in triumph, but in tenderness. In the quiet recognition of one soul in another. In love that had outlasted gods and storms. Penelope had guarded Ithaca's soul while Odysseus had wandered the world. And now, together, they would rebuild, not just a kingdom but a life. The war was over. The waiting had ended. And in that stillness, love, quiet, stubborn, enduring, stood victorious. Morning light spread across Ithaca like a balm after storm. The palace, cleansed of its usurpers, now stood quiet in the hands of its rightful master. Odysseus had survived war, sea, seduction, and the underworld. But peace, as he would soon learn, was no simple inheritance. Blood demanded answer, and the island had not yet exhaled. In the great hall, the bodies of the suitors still lay where they had fallen. Sons of nobles, cousins of warriors, nephews of lords, all now slain by the king they once mocked. But though justice had been served, the web of kinship had only begun to unravel. Vengeance, in Greek tradition, was rarely singular. One death begot another. One wrong stirred many. Telemachus and Odysseus stood together among the aftermath. The son bore the fresh confidence of action, while the father carried the weight of memory. "We must act quickly," Odysseus said. "Their families will seek retribution. We must not become tyrants in victory, but neither can we falter." Outside the palace walls, word spread like wildfire that Odysseus had returned, that he had slaughtered over 100 suitors in a single night, that the halls once ruled by deception were now ruled by blood. Some wept, some rejoiced, others sharpened their blades. Among the mourners was Eupeithes, father of Antinous, the boldest and most insolent of the suitors. His grief burned into wrath. "Odysseus is no hero," he shouted. "He is a butcher. We must rise against him, or all our sons will perish beneath his rule." And so a faction formed, fathers, brothers, kin of the fallen, armed with grief and steel. A civil war brewed beneath the olive trees, fueled not by politics, but by pain. Peace now hung by the thinnest thread. But the gods, ever watchful, had grown weary of endless violence. Athena descended once more, not as a whisper, but as a force. She appeared first to Odysseus, instructing him to withdraw from public view. "You have fought enough," she said. "Now let me guide your final battle, not by blade, but by wisdom." She then appeared to the assembly of avengers, veiled in the likeness of Mentor, Odysseus's old companion. With voice firm yet divine, she halted their march. "Will you destroy Ithaca for pride? Has not war taken enough? Must fathers bury more sons?" Eupeithes, blinded by rage, refused to yield. He lunged forward, but Telemachus, now a man grown in fire, met him in the field. Their blades clashed, but it was the younger who triumphed. Eupeithes fell not as a villain, but as a casualty of grief. The moment was frozen. Swords lowered. Hands trembled. The older men looked upon Telemachus, not as a boy, but as Ithaca's future. Athena, shedding her mortal form, appeared in full radiance. "Enough," she declared. "This blood ends now. Let there be peace, or I shall curse both houses." In ancient Greece, the gods were not abstract, they were law, power, presence. And when Athena spoke, men listened. The avengers dropped their weapons. The blood feud dissolved, not in satisfaction, but in surrender to divine decree. Odysseus emerged from the shadows. He did not gloat. He did not boast. He stood solemn, scarred, silent. "I have returned," he said. "Not for vengeance, but for Ithaca. If peace is our path, I will walk it. If blood is demanded, I will spill mine first." That humility ended the war. The people saw not a tyrant, but a king who had lost everything, and yet still chose mercy. And thus the house of Laertes was restored, not through dominance, but through restraint. Days later, Odysseus journeyed into the countryside to find his aging father, Laertes, now a withered shadow of the man who once ruled the land. He found him among the trees, digging soil, clad in rags. At first, Laertes did not recognize his son. But when Odysseus revealed his identity by recounting the trees his father had once gifted him in the orchard, fig, olive, pear, Laertes broke. The two embraced, not as king and heir, but as father and son healed by reunion. Ithaca began to mend. The palace was cleansed. The land replanted. The songs once sung in sorrow now shifted to hope. Peace had returned, not as a reward, but as a fragile promise maintained by wisdom and the memory of war. Odysseus would rule quietly, not as a warrior king, but as a steward. He had seen too much death to crave glory. Penelope sat by his side, no longer a woman waiting, but a queen reawakened. And Telemachus, who had walked in shadow, now stepped forward in light. Yet beneath it all lay a truth older than Troy. Peace is not the absence of violence, but the choice to resist it. And that choice, made by mortals and gods alike, became the true legacy of the Odyssey. Time passed gently in Ithaca after the sword had been sheathed. Odysseus, who once woke to the crashing of waves and the roar of monsters, now rose to birdsong and the rustle of olive leaves. Yet peace, while welcome, did not arrive without restlessness. A man who had spent 20 years in pursuit of home could not forget the shape of motion. Each morning, Odysseus walked the boundaries of his estate, not to guard it, but to reacquaint himself with stillness. He traced the trees he had planted before Troy, now grown tall. He watched the sea from the cliffs, no longer fearing it, but wary still of its memories. for every wave seemed to whisper the names of those who had been lost. In the village below, life resumed. The markets bustled again. Fields were plowed, flutes played, festivals revived. But the shadow of the suitors still lingered. Children who once laughed in the halls now stared cautiously. Widows mourned not kings, but sons who had dreamed of wealth and found ruin. Odysseus did not avoid them. He walked among the people as man, not myth. He offered reparations where he could, and silence where words would fail. Some forgave, some could not, but none could deny that the king who had returned was not the same man who had left. Telemachus grew into his role with grace. Where once he had been hesitant, now he was resolute. He learned not just from speeches, but from presence. How his father negotiated disputes, held his temper, and bore his scars without hiding them. In him, Ithaca found not just an heir but continuity. Penelope too shifted. She had spent decades guarding herself against illusions, raising a son while fending off the ambitions of strangers. Now, with the world calm, she let herself breathe again. She walked the gardens, spoke poetry aloud, and resumed the loom, not to weave funeral shrouds, but to create beauty. And yet, the journey did not truly end with Ithaca. The legacy of Odysseus's voyage rippled outward, carried in the songs of bards, the whispers of seamen, the prayers of wanderers. His name became something more than a name. It became a story, a shape in the world that guided others through uncertainty. Some saw in his tale a warning that glory costs too much and cleverness can twist fate. Others saw inspiration, a man who defied gods and endured heartbreak to return to love. But what endured most was the complexity of it. Odysseus was no flawless hero. He lied, he delayed, he failed, and yet he persisted. That was his true greatness. Late one evening, Odysseus sat beside his son, watching stars over the wine-dark sea. "What did you fear most, father?" Telemachus asked. Odysseus was quiet. Then he said, "The silence, after the storms, when nothing spoke and even the gods were still. That's when a man faces himself." This reflection defined the legacy he left, not in monuments or temples, but in the understanding that journeys, especially homecomings, are measured not by distance, but by change. Odysseus's Ithaca was not the same place he had left, nor was he the same man who once called it home. In the years that followed, pilgrims arrived at Ithaca not to conquer or to trade, but to listen. They came to hear the story told by Eumaeus the swineherd, or to walk the cliffs where Odysseus once gazed at the sea. Ithaca became a quiet sanctuary, a symbol of endurance and return. Bards sang of the bow and the suitors, of the Cyclops and Calypso, but among the elders of Ithaca, the stories that mattered most were quieter. How the king sat with shepherds, how he taught the names of stars to children, how he knelt by his father's grave and wept without shame. The gods, too, turned their gaze elsewhere. Their hands had shaped the path, but it was mortal choice that had determined its meaning. Zeus admired the balance restored. Poseidon, though grudgingly, accepted the ending. And Athena, ever fond of strategy, smiled upon the peace she helped forge. Odysseus never again sailed far from Ithaca's shores. But in his dreams, he revisited distant lands, not in longing, but in gratitude. He dreamed of Aeolus and Circe, of the Sirens' shore, of his mother's shadow, and Achilles' lament. Dreams not of terror, but of memory reclaimed. And in his final days, as his strength waned and the olive tree outside his chamber bloomed anew, he knew that the greatest journey had not been across sea or time, but through the soul. The Odyssey was not merely a return to home. It was the long, winding road back to oneself. Far above the olive groves of Ithaca, beyond the clouds and winds, the gods gathered. From their thrones on Olympus, they watched the mortal world settle into peace. The war had ended, the oaths fulfilled, the wandering king had come home, and yet, among them, a silence remained. A space once filled by the ceaseless interventions in the life of one man, Odysseus. Zeus, father of gods and men, looked down upon Ithaca not with thunder in his hand, but with contemplation. He had witnessed a mortal not just defy death, but persist through longing. Of all those who left for Troy, he mused aloud, this one intrigues me most, not for strength, not for fame, but for the restless heart that never surrendered. Hera, queen of heavens, spoke little of Odysseus. Her gaze had often favored the larger movements of kings and empires. Yet even she, goddess of hearth and union, admired the bond that had endured between Odysseus and Penelope. Two lives braided across decades, woven like threads by destiny and defiance. Poseidon, lord of the sea, still bore a scar of pride. Odysseus had blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and for that Poseidon had lashed him with storms, delaying his journey, scattering his ships. Yet now even Poseidon's wrath had softened. He suffered enough, the sea god admitted. He earned the salt in his veins. Athena, most loyal of all to Odysseus, watched not with regret but pride. He was my finest pupil, she said, clever, flawed, fierce, and deeply human. In every trial he learned not just how to survive but how to understand. And through him my wisdom was tested and fulfilled. Ares, god of war, scoffed. He was no Achilles, he muttered, no man of brawn, no hero of fire. But even he did not deny that it was Odysseus, not the strongest warrior, who had outlasted the war and shaped its ending. Victory, Ares had to admit, came sometimes not through force but through endurance. Apollo remembered the songs sung of Odysseus, the ballads carried from island to island, from hearth to palace. The god of music had heard them all. He was sung not for conquest, he said, but for longing, for wit and will and return. That is the mark of greatness, not in the shout of battle, but in the whisper of memory. Even Hades, keeper of the dead, held a place in his realm for the name of Odysseus. When the hero had ventured to the underworld and spoken with the shades, he did not flinch. He listened, he wept, he respected the silence of the grave. And for that, Hades gave him safe passage, not because he was strong, but because he was reverent. On Olympus, the gods debated no longer. Odysseus had become something more than man. He had been mortal, yes, aching, aging, erring. But in that very humanity, he had touched the divine. His choices, shaped by pain and hope, had carved a story that even immortals respected. The fates, those weavers of destiny, held his thread among their finest. Clotho, who spun it, remembered the cry of his birth. Lachesis, who measured it, recalled the moment he first strung his bow. Atropos, who would one day cut it, held her shears gently, as if waiting for a story to finish in silence rather than sorrow. In temples far beyond Ithaca, sailors offered prayers to Odysseus, hoping for safe passage. In schools, young minds recited his trials as lessons not just in courage, but in patience. In taverns, his tale was told over wine and firelight, not to stir laughter, but to remind men what it means to return. And though Odysseus himself grew older, his image in the minds of others only sharpened, not as a perfect man but as a mirror of mortal striving. He was remembered as someone who had loved deeply, wept honestly, fought strategically, and waited with the weight of years. For the gods, who exist outside of time, it was rare to be moved by the journey of one man. But Odysseus, with all his contradictions, had touched each of them. He had made them argue, intervene, change course. And that, in the divine realm, was no small thing. They remembered the scent of cedar as he built his raft, the salt in his wounds, the prayer whispered to a starless sky. They remembered his lies, not out of malice, but to survive. They remembered how he whispered his name only when it was safest. And finally, how he whispered it to Penelope, and it meant everything. Even Hermes, the messenger, who once guided the souls of suitors to the underworld, paused in flight when passing over Ithaca. There lies the man who returned, he would say to new souls. Not just to a place, but to himself. And so the gods remembered, not just because he had survived their trials, but because he had turned them into stories, into meaning, into something mortals could live by. And in this remembrance, Odysseus passed into myth, not because he was flawless, but because he was faithful to the journey, no matter how long, no matter how hard. Seasons turned over Ithaca like pages of a long-awaited book. Spring, once a time of mourning and uncertainty, now brought renewal. Not just in fields and orchards, but in spirit. The land, like its king, had been tested. And now, under a gentler sun, it began to bloom again. The fields were no longer left untended. The shepherds who had once whispered of dead kings now whistled songs of the living. Goats clambered across hillsides, and vineyards thickened with promise. Odysseus had not only reclaimed his throne, he had reawakened the soil beneath it. But the rebirth of Ithaca was not only in nature, it was in the minds of its people. For 20 years they had lived without direction, ruled not by law but by exploitation. The suitors had eaten, lied, and laughed, leaving behind hollow echo chambers of power. Now a different tone resonated, one of discipline, humility, and rebuilding. Odysseus did not rule with the iron fist of vengeance, but with a shepherd's hand. He walked the roads often without guards, listening to the grievances of farmers and fishermen. To each he offered not gold or promises but time, the rarest gift a king could give. They, in turn, gave him something rarer, trust. Penelope, now again queen in full dignity, reassembled her household with wisdom and quiet strength. She chose no favorites. She forgave where she could. She dismissed those whose loyalty had failed without cruelty. To the women who had suffered under the suitors' oppression, she offered respect and labor with dignity. Within the palace walls, laughter cautiously returned. Not the reckless mirth of drunk suitors, but the kind that came from children chasing each other across polished stone floors, and servants telling stories late into the night. Even the bards, once silenced by fear, sang again, of hope, of home, of the man who had outwaited the storm. Telemachus was no longer a shadow in his father's legacy. He took on duties not out of obligation, but out of pride. He oversaw disputes, managed trade routes, and met emissaries with the poise of a man who had known loss. Where Odysseus had once been the mind of Ithaca, Telemachus now became its hands. Old Laertes, too frail to rule but too proud to fade, walked through his orchards with a staff carved by his son. Farmers came to him still, seeking his wisdom on the seasons. His voice was rasped by age, but when he spoke of trees and roots, all listened. For he too was a root of Ithaca, buried deep, holding firm. The people began to create again. Weavers dyed cloths not just for function, but for beauty. Potters painted scenes of homecoming and loyalty. Carpenters carved likenesses of Penelope and Odysseus, not for temples but for hearths. Even children etched boats in the sand, giving them names like Perseverance and Return. Foreign ships came once more to Ithacan shores, not as invaders, but as traders and guests. Merchants from Pylos and Sparta brought goods and gifts. They spoke of the peace in Ithaca, of the clever king, and the queen who had waited. Odysseus received them with generosity, but never forgot the value of caution. Memory had taught him too well. Festivals returned, too. On the night of the first spring moon, the people lit lanterns along the cliffs, singing songs that echoed across the sea. It was not just a celebration of the gods, but of the mortal will to endure. Odysseus and Penelope, hand in hand, watched the lights flicker like stars born on land. Among these lights stood Eumaeus, the loyal swineherd. He was no longer a servant, but a brother to the crown. He had no need for riches, only for purpose. Odysseus built him a home beside the palace, where loyalty could look upon legacy and smile. The scars of the past did not vanish. They were etched into the palace walls and the hearts of many. But they became sacred reminders not of ruin, but of rising. Ithaca no longer feared the sea, for it had brought back its son. Nor did it fear strangers, for it had once welcomed gods in disguise. Children born after the suitor's fall grew up hearing two kinds of stories. One of the king who wandered and returned, and another of a people who waited, struggled, and chose hope. Both were truths, and both were necessary. Odysseus did not build monuments to himself. Instead, he restored the harbor, widened the fields, and left a grove of olive trees near the western cliff where sailors could rest beneath their shade. "Let Ithaca be remembered not for war," he said, "but for return." The gods, watching from Olympus, saw in this small kingdom a model of balance. Athena in particular, pleased with the harmony forged from pain, whispered in dreams to other kings, "Rule not only with wisdom, but with patience." Thus Ithaca, once a forgotten isle, became a symbol across the Aegean, not for its armies or wealth, but for its story. A story of waiting, of wounds, and of wonder. And within its stones and soil lived a truth older than time, that even after loss, a land like a heart can be made new. Years passed gently in Ithaca. The sun continued to rise over the same hills, the olive groves thickened, and children grew into the stories they once heard at fireside. Odysseus, once a figure of epic deeds, now moved more slowly. His voice grew softer, his gaze deeper. Time had finally caught the king who once outran fate. He had ruled with balance, raised his son with wisdom, and lived beside Penelope in peace. Yet even as his island flourished, a whisper remained in his ear, not from the gods, but from the sea. It called to him not as a tyrant demanding service, but as a friend awaiting farewell. Odysseus remembered the prophecy told to him by Tiresias in the underworld, of a final journey yet to come. A voyage not of conquest or return, but of reconciliation. A journey to a place where men knew nothing of oars or sails, where he must bring an oar upon his shoulder until someone asked, "What strange burden is that?" Only then would he find rest. And so, one morning before dawn, he rose before even the birds stirred. He kissed Penelope's brow as she slept, whispered to Telemachus words not of command, but of love, and stepped outside to greet the sea once more, not as an enemy, but as an old companion. He carried an oar across his back, carved from the very wood of his first ship. It was no longer meant for water, but for memory. With a walking stick in one hand and the oar in the other, Odysseus left Ithaca, not with ships, not with men, but alone, as all final journeys must be. He walked across valleys and mountains, through cities that had never heard his name, through forests where birds did not sing of Troy or Circe or Cyclopes. He passed children who laughed at the oar he carried, thinking it a strange banner of some forgotten tribe. At last, he reached a land so distant from the sea that none knew its scent. There, as he rested beside a well, a man approached and asked the question he had long awaited. "Stranger, why do you carry that winnowing fan?" For to them, the oar was not an oar, but a mystery, a relic of something long lost. Odysseus smiled. The prophecy had come to pass. This was the place. Here, in a land untouched by his wars or woes, he would at last find stillness. He planted the oar into the earth, as if to say, "I no longer sail. I no longer flee. I have arrived." And so, the last of the great heroes of Troy laid down not in battle, nor in storms, but beneath a foreign sky. He was not mourned by bards or kings, but remembered in silence by the land that took him in. The gods watched and said nothing, for nothing more needed to be said. Back in Ithaca, Penelope knew. She awoke with tears not of sorrow, but of understanding. She walked to the western cliff, where the sea brushed the edge of her world, and sat with the olive trees. She did not weep aloud. She listened, and in the wind, she heard his name spoken gently by the waves. Telemachus ruled with quiet strength. He did not try to imitate his father's cunning or his legend. He ruled as himself, but with the grace of one raised by a man who had returned from everything. Stories of Odysseus continued across islands, temples, and taverns, but now they carried a different tone. Not just of adventure, but of longing. Not just of cleverness, but of enduring love. He had become more than a man. He had become a map of what it meant to be human. The oar that he had carried was said to sprout an olive branch, where he planted it, and beneath it, in time, a small shrine was built, not of marble or gold, but of driftwood, pebbles, and the tokens of wanderers who had lost and found themselves again. In that shrine, no priest presided. No prayers were required. Only silence. A place where travelers could sit and remember that even the longest journey seeks not victory, but peace. The gods, who had once tangled so deeply in Odysseus's fate, now watched over his memory with reverence. He had played his part in their theater, and then with dignity exited the stage. And Ithaca endured not as a place on a map, but as an idea. The idea that one could go astray, be tested, be broken, and still return. That the journey itself, however winding, was sacred. Thus ends the story of Odysseus, not with conquest, nor with fanfare, but with quiet footsteps fading into legend, and the gentle rustle of olive leaves in the wind. He was not the only hero, but he was the one who came home, and that, in the end, made all the difference.